5 survival lessons from Li Si for the ambitious. 1. Ambition is not wrong, but it must be coupled with practical capability. If one only looks at Li Si's tragic end, many hastily conclude that ambition is dangerous, that the higher one aims, the easier it is to court disaster. But that is a shallow view. Li Si's problem was not that he had ambition, but that his ambition, at certain crucial moments, outpaced his own growth. The ancients never condemned ambition. On the contrary, they understood very well that without ambition, humans would forever be stuck in their predetermined fate. Ambition is the flame that makes the humble dare to lift their heads, the unknown dare to step out of their village, dare to leave a small life to seek a grander destiny. Li Si started from the bottom of society. Without ambition, he would never have left his hometown, never stepped into the center of the world's power. But the ancients also warned that ambition is merely the engine, not the wheels. A vehicle needs wheels to move, a person needs capability to go far. And capability is not born from momentary excitement but from years of silent, even humiliating, accumulation. Li Si understood this earlier than many. Before becoming Prime Minister, he accepted being unknown, studying law, learning to read people's hearts, learning to see the bigger picture instead of immediate gains. He didn't delude himself into thinking he was an outstanding genius. He understood that he could only survive if he was pragmatic, clear-headed, and knew his limits. This very period saved him many times later on. In modern life, not a few people harbor great ambition, but hate two things: waiting and training. They want quick success, early recognition, and to step into positions they are not yet strong enough to handle. That is when ambition transforms from a driving force into a burden. When capability is insufficient, ambition drags people into a state of tension and fear, forcing them to conceal their immaturity with grand words, dazzling images, and reckless decisions. Li Si, in his early stages, did not make that mistake. He understood very well that the world does not fear those with grand dreams. The world only punishes those with grand dreams but empty hands. Therefore, he chose to go slow but steady. He walked in the shadows but learned every rule of the game. There's a truth very few people are willing to face. Most tragedies don't come from failure, but from success that comes too soon. When a person lacks internal strength but rises to a high position, they are forced to strain themselves to play a role they are not truly ready for. Every day is lived in fear of being exposed, seen through, replaced. That very fear distorts them, pulling them further and further from their original self. Li Si later forgot this initial lesson. When power came too much, too fast, he began to believe that his position was self-evident, that his old experiences were enough to withstand any new changes. That was when ambition overran his capability. But if we only look at the end of his life to dismiss his entire initial journey, we would miss an incredibly important survival lesson. That lesson is, allow ambition to lead the way, but do not allow it to usurp the authority of capability. Whenever ambition stirs, ask yourself, do I understand this matter enough? Am I ready to take responsibility? Am I steady enough if the winds change direction? If the answer is no, then retreating is not cowardice but wisdom. The ancients greatly feared a state called satisfied before being full. That is when the ego inflates faster than true capability. At such times, people easily become arrogant, disregarding rules, looking down on others, and ultimately, even disregarding danger. Li Si avoided that state for many years thanks to the sobriety of one who rose from the bottom. But once he forgot who he once was, he easily lost his balance. In today's life, this lesson is even more valuable. You may yearn for a great career, a high position, a wide influence. That is not wrong. What is wrong is when you let ambition force you to play the role of a successful person instead of patiently becoming capable enough to succeed. Imagine, you are carrying a large, empty bag on your back. The mouth of the bag is wide open, fluttering in the wind, looking from afar as if it's filled with treasures. But with each step, the bag only makes you stumble more because it has no real weight. Only when you quietly pick up each stone and place it in the bag, even if it gets heavier and your steps slow down, will the bag truly stand firm on your back, no matter how strong the wind blows. Life is the same. Ambition is the bag, capability is what fills it. If the bag is big but empty, you'll topple even before the wind blows hard. 2. Know how to leverage a greater force. Don't try to be a lone hero. If one had to choose the most important capability that allowed Li Si to go so far in life, it wasn't necessarily his strategic genius, nor entirely his ruthlessness, but his ability to perceive the prevailing momentum and know how to position himself correctly within it. This is something many ambitious people misunderstand or are unwilling to accept. People often grow up with a beautiful illusion, wanting to be a game changer, wanting to be the central figure, wanting to stand in the spotlight. But history and real life operate on a much colder logic. Most long-term survivors are not those who create waves, but those who know how to follow the strongest current. Li Si understood very early that in a warring era, an individual, no matter how brilliant, was merely a grain of sand if they stood in the wrong current. Instead of dreaming of individual achievements, he chose to enter the most powerfully forming machine of his time. The Qin dynasty, not because Qin was benevolent, nor because Qin was noble, but because Qin possessed the momentum to unify the world. That was an irresistible force. The important thing was that Li Si did not try to be the flag-bearer. He accepted standing behind, acting as the designer of the rules of the game rather than a hero on the battlefield. He let others receive the glory, while he maintained control over the structure. This was an extremely astute choice, yet also extremely difficult for many egos to swallow. In modern life, many people fail not because they lack ability, but because they want to prove themselves too soon. They refuse to stand below anyone, refuse to be a background for anyone, refuse to borrow strength from a larger system. They want to be independent, self-reliant, and shine on their own, but they don't realize that walking alone in a strong wind is very easy to be blown away. Li Si was not afraid to be a man in the shadows. He understood that the shade of a big tree is not to block the light, but to shelter from the wind. When standing under the shadow of a sufficiently powerful force, he had time to observe, adjust, and accumulate real power without needing to show off. This is the difference between short-term ambition and long-term ambition. The ancients once said, "Go with the flow to live, against the flow to perish." But going with the flow does not mean passively drifting. It means choosing the right boat and then climbing into your correct position on that boat. Li Si was not the captain, but he was the one who drew the map and set the rules for the entire journey. A common mistake of young people is to equate leveraging a force with weakness or subservience. But in reality, leveraging a force is a form of high intelligence. It requires one to accept that there are periods in life when the most important thing is not to show who you are, but rather what system you are a part of. Those who refuse to leverage a force often have two outcomes. Either they are exhausted from having to support everything themselves, or they are crushed by forces much greater than themselves. Li Si avoided this for most of his life because he did not see being a lone hero as a life ideal. For him, survival and going far were more important than being lauded. However, leveraging a force is also a double-edged sword. Once accustomed to moving within a great force, people easily lose the ability to stand on their own. Li Si later made this mistake. He tied his fate too closely to a power structure, to the extent that when that structure shifted, he had no escape route. This is the price to pay for leveraging a force while forgetting to keep a retreat path. The lesson, therefore, is not whether one should leverage a force or not, but rather leveraging a force while still maintaining one's individual capability. You can stand within a large company, a strong organization, a stable power system, but you must not let your entire value exist solely thanks to the name of that system. If tomorrow the signboard is taken down, you must still have something of your own left. In life, some people, upon entering a large environment, hastily demand equal status, demand an equal voice. They do not understand that a great force does not nurture the impatient. To leverage a force, one must first know how to blend into it, understand its logic, and accept a lower position for a sufficiently long period. Li Si did this very well in the early stages. He did not rush to impose his ego or demand recognition. He patiently accumulated power by controlling laws, mechanisms, and how people operated. That is power far more enduring than fame. Imagine you are standing before a raging river. One person jumps in, trying to swim against the current to prove their strength, only to be exhausted in a few minutes. The other person does not fight the current but follows the bank, finds a bend, finds where the water flows slower, and then uses the very force of the water to carry themselves far. Both enter the river, but only one has enough breath left to see the other side. Life is the same. Ambition is not a competition to see who can fight the wind best, but a journey of knowing when to unfurl sails and when to go with the flow. Truly wise people don't need to prove they are heroes. They just need to be sure that when the storm passes, they are still standing. 3. The higher you climb, the stronger the wind. Throughout Li Si's journey upward, there was one rule he once understood very well but later underestimated. The higher the position, the stronger the resistance, the brighter the light, the denser the shadow. People often dream of the summit as a peaceful place, where all efforts are rewarded, where one can breathe a sigh of relief after years of hardship. But in reality, the summit has never been a place of rest. It is where the wind begins to blow strongest. When he was low, Li Si lived in a state of caution and clear-headedness. He knew he was small, knew he could be eliminated at any moment, so every step was calculated, every word weighed. This very prudence helped him survive in a competitive and suspicious environment. But once he reached the pinnacle of power, once he became indispensable in the imperial machine, a very dangerous feeling began to stir. A sense of security. This feeling is not loud. It doesn't immediately cause people to make mistakes. It only makes them a little complacent, a little overconfident, believing that the old rules will continue to protect them. And this very small complacency in a high-power environment is enough to become a fatal crack. The ancients never said climbing high was wrong. They only reminded one very cruel thing: if you climb high and cannot withstand the wind, sooner or later you will fall. The wind here is not just competition, but also scrutinizing gazes, envy, unexpected changes in circumstances, and schemes that those below never see. In a low position, one receives less attention. A small mistake still offers a chance to correct it. But in a high position, every mistake is magnified, every choice is attributed to ulterior motives, every action can be interpreted in the worst possible way. Li Si entered this windy zone without sufficient mental preparation. A common mistake of ambitious people is to think that if they are capable enough, loyal enough, and dedicated enough, the wind will not blow their way. But power does not operate according to personal morality. It operates according to fear and self-interest. When you are low, people fear you less. When you are high, your mere existence is enough to make others uneasy. Li Si became a target not because he betrayed anyone, but because he was too important. When a person holds too much power, too many secrets, too much influence, they are no longer a tool but become a risk in the eyes of others. The wind begins to blow not because you are wrong, but because you are in a position that makes others lose sleep. In modern life, this remains terrifyingly true. When you are an ordinary employee, your shortcomings are overlooked. When you become a manager, every one of your decisions is scrutinized. When you are at the top, every word can be quoted, twisted, stored, and reused at the most disadvantageous moment. Climbing high is not just about gaining power, it's about gaining exponentially more risk. Many people prepare only for the climb, not for standing firm. They learn how to compete, how to perform, how to seize a position, but they don't learn how to live in isolation, in suspicion, under constant pressure. When the wind picks up, they realize that climbing skills are not the same as summit standing skills. Li Si was once very good at reading people's hearts, but at the peak, people's hearts changed faster than his ability to observe. When circumstances shifted, relationships thought to be solid became fragile. Promises once valuable suddenly lost their effect. The wind at the top gives no warning and no chance to correct mistakes. The ancients, therefore, advised wise people when they reach high positions to often retract themselves, not to show off, not to accumulate more grievances, not to let their ego inflate with their status. But this is the hardest thing, because power is like strong wine. The more you drink, the less self-control you have. After many years at the top, Li Si could no longer maintain the humility of one who had risen from the bottom. Another painful aspect of strong winds is loneliness. In a high position, very few people tell the truth. What you hear is often what you want to hear. Real warnings are dismissed as opposition. At that point, the wind not only blows from the outside but also forms from within, from self-satisfaction and blind faith in one's position. Imagine you are standing on top of a tall tower. On the ground, the wind is just a gentle breeze, but the higher you go, the stronger the wind, with no shelter. You don't fall because the wind blows the first time, but because you believe you are used to the wind and no longer cling tightly to the railing as you did when you first ascended. The lesson of the higher you climb, the stronger the wind is therefore not meant to scare the ambitious, but to awaken preparedness. If you want to climb high, ask yourself 3 things. Can you withstand scrutiny? Can you withstand loneliness? And can you withstand the possibility of everything turning upside down overnight? If not, it's not time yet. Truly wise survivors don't fear the wind. They only fear standing high and forgetting that the wind always exists. Li Si once knew that, but ultimately forgot. And the price of forgetting at the summit is always the most expensive. 4. Power has no lasting loyalty. In everyday life, people easily believe in a comforting idea. Those who have overcome hardship with you will not turn their backs. Those who owe you a favor will remember it. Those who called you important will protect you to the end. But upon stepping into the deep layers of power, Li Si left future generations a chilling lesson. Power does not operate on loyalty, but on self-interest and fear. Li Si was not someone who failed to understand this principle. On the contrary, he was very good at seeing through people's hearts. But his tragedy lay in this. He understood that rule when he was at the bottom, but forgot it when he was at the top. When he had nothing in his hands, he was always cautious, never trusting anyone absolutely, never placing his life in a single relationship. But when power reached its peak, he began to believe that his contributions were great enough to become a protective charm. This is an illusion that many ambitious people fall into, believing that the past can guarantee the future. They think that they have contributed enough, sacrificed enough, been loyal enough, so they will be treated differently. But power has no long-term memory. It only remembers who is useful in the present. In the machinery of power, people are valued not by past achievements, but by their potential to cause risk. When someone who was once a pillar becomes too large, knows too much, is too difficult to replace, that is precisely when they begin to become a threat. Not because they did something wrong, but because their existence makes others uneasy. Li Si fell squarely into this position. He was once indispensable under Emperor Qin Shi Huang. But when circumstances changed, when a new ruler needed to consolidate his position, an old official holding too much power became a thorn in the side. Power does not ask, "What have you done for me?" but asks, "If I keep you, will I lose sleep?" This is a truth that pains many when they enter large environments. In your job, you might have been the one who saved projects, took responsibility, bore pressure for others. But when the structure changes, leaders change, priorities shift, you can be quickly sidelined. Not because you are useless, but because you no longer fit the new order. Those who have never tasted power often resent this. They call it ingratitude, betrayal. But the ancients saw it more soberly. That is the nature of power. Power exists to protect itself, not to protect any individual. Li Si's mistake was not that he failed to understand this, but that he placed his trust in the wrong place. He believed that long-standing loyalty was enough to ensure safety. But in the world of power, safety does not come from loyalty, but from whether you are still needed and whether you are easy to remove. The higher one's position, the easier it is to confuse personal relationships with functional roles. They think people respect them because of who they are. But in reality, most of that respect comes from the chair. When the chair wobbles, everything else wobbles with it. In modern life, this is very clear. A leader, while in office, may be surrounded by loyalty, praise, and support. But upon leaving the position, many relationships naturally vanish. Not because people are bad, but because those relationships were built on power, not on pure affection. The ancients therefore advised, do not entrust your life to the goodwill of power. When entering a highly competitive environment, understand that all relationships are conditional. Only when you clearly see this will you not resent being let go. Li Si, in his final years, did not learn this lesson in time. He continued to act as a meritorious official protected by the past, while circumstances had shifted to a completely different logic. When he realized it, it was too late. Power does not grant time for regret. Imagine you are standing on a bridge supported by many large pillars. When the water is calm, the bridge is solid, and you believe it will always be there. But when the current changes direction, people begin to dismantle pillars to build a new bridge. You don't fall because you are weak, but because the bridge no longer needs to maintain its old form. Li Si's lesson is not meant to make people cold or suspicious, but to awaken us. If you enter a place of power, always remember not to expect to be treated with gratitude. Prepare an escape route for yourself when interests change. Maintain your own value, your own skills, and a spiritual life that is not entirely dependent on status. One who understands this will be less bitter when replaced, less shocked when betrayed, and most importantly, less destroyed when power is no longer on their side. That is true survival in a world that promises nothing long-lasting. 5. Knowing when to stop is true survival. Of the 5 survival lessons from Li Si's life, this is the most painful yet also the one ambitious people of any era are most likely to overlook: knowing when to stop. Not stopping due to failure, not stopping due to fear, but stopping when you still have the power of choice. People often misunderstand the concept of stopping. They believe stopping is giving up, losing, betraying one's initial ideals. But in the survival wisdom of the ancients, stopping at the right time is not losing, but shifting from an offensive stance to a life-preserving one. And preserving one's life, preserving oneself, is the long-term victory. Li Si was not lacking in intelligence or experience, but he pursued a very common mistake to its extreme, being accustomed to advancing but forgetting how to retreat. For half his life, he climbed by seizing opportunities, clinging to great forces, scaling each rung of power. Each step forward brought success, forming a subconscious belief: as long as I stay in the game, as long as I don't let go, I will still have a chance to turn things around. But power is not like ordinary games. There are some games where the longer you stay, the lower your chances of survival. When the tide has turned, when the rules of the game have changed, clinging on is no longer perseverance but recklessness. The ancients greatly feared a type of person, those who don't know when to stop when the wind has shifted, because they no longer act based on reason but on the fear of loss of power, loss of position, loss of reputation, loss of their sense of self. And that very fear makes them make even worse decisions. Li Si saw the danger signs. He was not unaware that the court was changing direction, not unaware of the coldness, suspicion, or even plots to remove him. But he underestimated the speed of the collapse of trust. He believed he still had a little time, that his past merits were still enough to negotiate, and that little bit took everything away. In modern life, many people also get stuck in this trap. They stay in a toxic environment, thinking they've invested too much to leave. They continue a decaying relationship, fearing the loss of their own image. They cling to an unsuitable position, believing that if they leave, their entire previous journey will become meaningless. But the ancients saw things differently. They understood that the meaning of the past lies not in having to stay forever, but in what one has learned to move forward. If a path was once right but is now wrong, continuing down it merely out of regret for past effort is not loyalty, but self-destruction. The hardest part of knowing when to stop is not the action itself, but the letting go of the ego. Because when one stops, one is forced to admit that they no longer control the situation as before. And for the ambitious, this is a great pain. They are accustomed to being the decision maker, the center, the one in power. Stopping means accepting that you are just a small part of the bigger picture. Li Si could not overcome this hurdle. He refused to leave the game board when he still had a chance to withdraw. He chose to stay, chose to gamble one last time, and power does not grant second chances. In power, the loser doesn't get to correct mistakes. The ancients once said, "A good general is not one who wins many battles, but one who knows how to avoid unwinnable battles." Knowing when to stop is not out of cowardice, but because one recognizes that continuing will only lead to greater losses. In personal life, this carries a deeper meaning. Knowing when to stop is not just about leaving a position or an environment, but also about stopping at the right time within oneself. Stopping ambitions that exceed one's capacity. Stopping the need to prove oneself to those who don't need to understand. Stopping the exchange of health, family, and integrity just to maintain an external reputation. Imagine you are rowing a boat on a large river. Initially, the current is favorable, each stroke moves you forward. But then it rains, the water swirls fiercely, and the current changes direction. You know clearly that if you continue to row, the boat might capsize. The shore is still there, not far. But if you push on for just a little longer, just to prove you haven't lost, then when the boat capsizes, there will be no shore left to climb onto. The final lesson from Li Si, therefore, is not advice to abandon ambition, but a warning about its limits. Ambition requires wisdom to begin, but courage to end at the right time. The weak let go out of fear. The strong let go because they clearly see the price to pay if they continue. True survival is not about how high you have climbed, but whether, after all the turmoil, you have managed to preserve yourself. Li Si won many battles in his life, but he lost the most important one, the battle of knowing when to stop. And precisely because of that, the lesson he left for posterity is so profound. Li Si's life is like a mirror, not for admiration but for self-reflection. These 5 survival lessons do not teach us cunning tricks to outdo others, but rather how to go far without self-destruction, to climb high with a path of retreat, to be ambitious yet preserve one's life and soul.